the concept of God can only do but so much. That God is somehow a plausible idea is one thing, but plausible ideas don't do anything to shape your life. They may give you some context, have a framework of how life may work or how life should work or so forth, but you can never bump up against a concept. You can never get angry at a concept. You can think you get angry with the concept of an unjust justice system. But what you're really mad at is not the concept of racism or injustice or whatever it may be. You are upset with the people who enact that, the people who actually do these things, who actually make injustice possible, because they're real people that you can bump up against in different ways. But God as a person is so much more powerful than God as a concept, God as an idea. In the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, very early on, we have the picture of a prophet who is a bit confused and a bit frustrated. He feels as if God is not there, or at least God is not active. Okay, wrestling with this notion of, I have a concept of who God is, and it's not playing out the way that I wanted it to. And so Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2, he says, How long, O Lord, must I call for help and you not listen, and cry out to you about violence and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. And Habakkuk seems like visibly, verbally upset with God. And that I find that so interesting, especially considering sort of recent news about Ahmaud and the ongoing murdering of Black men in the United States of America. He's frustrated. He's upset with what's happening in the land. And God is not simply a concept for him, but he has such a personal relationship with God, an understanding of who God is, and a desire for God to act out in the way that he believes God should act out, and it's not happening in his way. He has he starts an argument with God. And some people want to hesitate to encourage that. And I guess I would hesitate to encourage people to argue with God. Didn't turn out well for Job. Kind of turned out okay for Jacob. What I do enjoy about that, and what I enjoy about the prophets in general that I see through the Old Testament, is that God is not simply a concept to them. Concepts come and go. And when reality sets in, we can let concepts go away. We can let them go, or we can hold on to whatever it may be, but they don't hold much weight in the face of injustice, in the face of wickedness and evil and just life. Concepts. An idea is cool to start with. You can have a lot of rational arguments for why God exists, why the God of the Bible exists. You can have a lot of rational arguments for why you believe the way that you do. But at some point, there has to be a bumping up against those beliefs. Otherwise, they stay concepts. And so to bump up against a particular person offers us, I believe, something more tangible in the face of injustice. Even if things don't go our way, we're not the first ones to look around in the world and say to God, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? But to have that feeling is not unnatural. Or the worst version of that would be to simply give up. When you see injustice, when you see problems, what Habakkuk could say is, the reason why all this injustice around me is happening is because God either doesn't care or he doesn't exist. But those two options, God doesn't care or God doesn't exist, are not in the mind of Habakkuk. He knows that God exists, and he knows that God cares. He knows that God is not simply a concept, but a person. And so because he knows that God is a person, because he knows that God does exist, and because God does care, he's upset because he's saying, if you cared, you'd do something about this. And I'm having a cognitive dissonance about this. Something is not right. And he goes to God with his problem. Habakkuk is not indifferent towards God because he knows that God is not indifferent towards injustice. It may not play out the way that you think it should. The justice system, the laws, biology, government, however well or bad you think your government is handling a pandemic, it's not as if he's indifferent towards that. And it's not as if it's a short time either. I mean, Habakkuk, I don't know the exact timeline about this, but the fact that he says, how long, Lord? No one says how long if it hasn't been going on that long. If it happens a couple times, you're like, oh, wow, there's some injustice, man. That was trippy. But man, thank the Lord that was an isolated incident. Thank God that Mike Brown was the one and only time that a black man would be murdered by a law enforcement official. That was crazy. That was a crazy instance, but it didn't happen for very long. No. Habakkuk says, how long? How long will you let this happen? And so we're not in a unique space. And that can be a discouragement to some people or an encouragement, however you look at it. We do not stand unique in contrast to human history, to see the rejoicing and joy of people throughout history, but also to see the suffering and the lament. And so the only way that we can truly wrestle through injustice, sickness, problems, whatever it may be, for us to have a real attachment to what's going on and a real attachment to God. God can't simply be a concept, because God is just a concept. Then he fades away. And a lot of people have seen in the face of injustice, when they see problems come in their life, they say, oh, well, I guess God either didn't exist or he didn't care. Either way, it was a concept that I no longer hold. But a person doesn't go in and out of existence. Particularly an eternal person such as God does not go in and out of existence. He may be more in the background than we desire him to be, but he's not absent. And you can have a pretty blunt and forward conversation with God only when he is a person and not a concept.